What would you do if an HOA fined you $10,000 for grass they don't even control? They fined me 10 grand for tall grass, but it didn't take long to see they were after something far bigger than a lawn. They wanted me off my own family ranch, using lies, forged papers, even fire in the middle of the night. But they didn't know I had evidence, the law on my side, and 15 acres they could never touch. And that's when the real fight began. The envelope came in the dust. I was standing at the front fence with a mug of black coffee, watching the wind push dry grass into little waves, when a white SUV turned off the county road and crawled up my driveway. It wasn't a neighbor's truck. It was shiny, spotless, with the Lakeside Ridge logo on the door, curved blue lines that looked like they belonged on a brochure, not out here on Calichet and goat heads. The driver, a young guy in a polo, never shut the engine off. He leaned out, slid something into my rusted mailbox, and backed out so fast his tires spit gravel. The SUV disappeared in a haze of dust, heading back toward the ridge and its row of new houses perched above the reservoir. I set my mug on the fence post and opened the box. Heat radiated off the metal. Inside lay a single cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy, with Lakeside Ridge Property Owners Association stamped in metallic blue across the top. My name, Jacob Mercer, sat underneath in a neat, unfriendly font. I tore it open at the roadside. Notice of violation and assessment, the heading said. Halfway down the page, the number stopped me. $10,000. $10,000 due in 30 days. The violation: chronic overgrowth and failure to maintain vegetation in accordance with community standards. For a second, it didn't compute. The wind tugged at the paper. A grasshopper pinged off my boot. Somewhere out near the water, a cow bellowed. Overgrowth. I lifted my head and took in my front pasture. 20 acres of West Texas earth stretched out in front of me. Patchy grass barely ankle high. Scattered mesquite. A few prickly pear clumps. More bare, cracked dirt than anything a city person would call lush. The drought had been chewing on us for 2 summers. Nothing out here was overgrown. If anything, it was hanging on by its fingernails. More importantly, the nearest Lakeside Ridge house was a mile and a half away, sitting smug and bright on the bluff above the reservoir. Between my gate and their stone entrance pillars, there was nothing but open land and a 2-lane strip of asphalt. I flipped the page. The words thickened into legal mud. Sections, subsections, references to an aesthetic management zone, and shared visibility corridors. 2 grainy, zoomed-in photos were stapled to the back, long shots of my north pasture taken from somewhere up on the ridge. In them, my land was nothing but a brown smudge behind their tidy white fences. The last paragraph made my jaw tighten. Failure to remit payment may result in the association pursuing all available remedies, including but not limited to liens placed against the subject property. Liens, on my ranch, over grass. I set the envelope on top of the mailbox before I crumpled it in my hand. My heart wasn't racing, but each beat landed hard, like it used to right before a mission briefing when the map came out and the room got quiet. This land had been Mercer land as long as anyone in town could remember. My granddad ran cattle here when the reservoir was still a dry canyon. My dad kept it alive through drought and bad markets and a spine that hurt him every day. When I got out of the Army, I bought out my brothers and came home because this was the only place that ever felt like the noise in my head belonged to something bigger than me. Wind, cattle, rain when we were lucky. Nobody had ever threatened to take it with a piece of paper. I read the notice again, slower. It mentioned an amendment to covenants filed 5 years earlier, tying contiguous parcels around the reservoir into association oversight. 5 years ago, I'd been patching fence and arguing with a feed store. No one had come down my driveway asking for my signature. No one had said, By the way, Jake, folks in dress shoes up on the ridge get to decide what your pasture should look like now. I looked east, over the fence toward the rise of the ridge. Even from down here, I could see their world honestly pretty. A clean line of roofs, tiny trees planted in perfect rows, sun flashing off big windows that faced the reservoir, all of it perched above water that had swallowed my family's best bottomland when the dam went in decades ago. And there, at the highest point, sat Bethany Reed's house, stone and stucco and glass, an infinity pool at the edge of her yard that made it look like her water ran straight into the lake. Bethany, HOA president, developer's wife, queen of lakeside living. I'd met her once. She'd driven up here in a white SUV the day they opened the gates, leaned out at my metal ranch gate and handed me a glossy brochure full of smiling families and pontoon boats. "Mr. Mercer," she'd said, "Lakeside Ridge is going to bring so much value to this corridor. We're practically neighbors now. I'm sure we'll find ways to keep things compatible." Compatible. I'd shrugged, tipped my hat, and gone back to checking a calving heifer. Her world and mine didn't touch. Now that word tasted like grit between my teeth. I walked back to the house, boots scuffing the packed earth. The screen door squealed when I pushed it open. Inside, the kitchen was dim and cool. Light came in through faded curtains, soft and dusty. I cleared a space on the scarred pine table and laid the notice there like a snake I didn't want near my boots. From the cabinet above the fridge, I pulled down a dented metal lockbox. Inside were my papers, deed, tax receipts, the survey map the county clerk had given me when I refinanced a few years back. I spread them out next to the HOA letter. The black lines of my boundary were familiar. From the county road up to the rocky north fence line, then down to the edge of the reservoir. My granddad had walked those lines with the original surveyor. My dad had walked them with me, leaning on a cane, the last spring he was alive. There was nothing in those papers about Lakeside Ridge. No covenants. No view corridors. No mention of some board up on the hill. Shock had done its work. Anger followed. Then something colder settled in my chest. This wasn't a mix-up. Someone over that ridge had decided their authority reached farther than their property line. At the bottom of the notice, printed in crisp blue ink, a final sentence waited. Failure to respond within the prescribed time frame will constitute acceptance of the association's findings and remedies. Acceptance. I picked up the paper, read that line again, then set it down and reached for the cordless phone on the counter. The association number was printed right there under Bethany Reed's stamped signature. Lakeside Ridge Property Owners Association. This is Karen. How may I assist you? The voice on the other end was smooth and bright. This is Jake Mercer on County Road 12, I said. I just got a letter saying I owe you folks 10 grand because my pasture hurt somebody's eyes. I'm calling to hear who decided that. Keys clicked faintly. One moment, sir. Yes. Mr. Mercer. Her tone cooled. You are in violation of our vegetation maintenance standards. The board has determined that the current condition of your parcel negatively impacts the visual experience of Lakeside Ridge residents. Your residents are 1.5 miles away, I said. They need binoculars to see my fence, much less my grass. Our jurisdiction includes established view corridors around the reservoir, she replied. It's all documented in the amended covenants on file with the county. I've got the county survey right in front of me, I said, keeping my voice level. It doesn't say a word about you, not a name, not a logo. A pause. When she spoke again, the brightness was gone. If you have concerns, you may attend the next board meeting and present them. Until then, the assessment and deadlines stand. Non-compliance will trigger further action, including liens. Who made this call? I asked. Who decided my land was suddenly under your standards? The board acts collectively, she said. Our president, Mrs. Reed, will be chairing Thursday's meeting at 7 p.m. Clubhouse at the main gate. Then, good day, Mr. Mercer. And the line went dead. I set the phone down beside the papers and stood there for a moment, listening to the ticks of the old wall clock and the slow whir of the ceiling fan. Through the open window over the sink, I could hear a faint, high-pitched whine, the sound of a lawnmower all the way over at Lakeside Ridge, chewing a lawn that never had to fight for water. I looked back at the notice, at the word liens, at the word acceptance. Out past the barn, the ridge carved a dark line against the sky. Somewhere up there, behind glass railings and stone walls, Bethany Reed probably thought she'd found an easy mark, an old family ranch with one guy living on it and a stack of bills like everybody else. Maybe she thought a big fine and a few threats would be enough to make me fall in line. Sell, move, make her view corridor nice and tidy. Maybe that worked where she came from. Out here we have a saying, you don't move a fence line without talking to the man whose name is on the deed. And before I accepted anything from Lakeside Ridge, I intended to find out exactly who thought they had their hands on mine. The next day dragged on slow and hot. Sky like polished steel, heat shimmering over the pastures. I tried to keep my hands busy, checking troughs, tightening loose wire, tapping a sticky float valve in the stock tank. But every time I walked past the house, the cream-colored notice on my kitchen table caught my eye like a nail sticking out of a plank. By late afternoon, the sun softened a little, shadows stretching long across the yard. I was stacking a few pieces of mesquite by the porch when I heard cautious footsteps on gravel. Jake? I turned. A man stood just inside my open gate, ball cap in his hands. Thin, narrow-shouldered, dust on his boots. Took me half a second to place him. Evening, Remy, I said. You're a long way from your goats. He gave a quick, nervous smile that didn't touch his eyes. Got a minute? He asked. Inside, if you don't mind. Out here, most talk happened on tailgates and porches. Wanting walls around it meant trouble. Sure, I said. Come on. The kitchen was cooler than outside, the old swamp cooler rattling in the window. The HOA letter and my survey map were still spread across the table. Remy's gaze went straight to them. So they finally sent one to you, he muttered. I poured 2 glasses of tea, slid one his way. You've seen this song before? I asked. He sat, turning his cap in his hands. I was at their meeting last night, he said. Up at the clubhouse. My sister cleans for one of those lakeside families. Told me they were planning something big about corridor views. I figured I'd sit in the back, keep quiet, see what big meant. His shirt was cleaner than usual, tucked in awkwardly. He'd dressed up for it. That told me enough before he said another word. And? I asked. He looked up, and for a second I saw the same kind of worry I'd seen on men waiting for bad news in field hospitals. They talked about you, he said. By name. Bethany did. My fingers tightened around the sweating glass. What did she say? Remy took a breath like he wanted to get it right. They went through their usual list first. Trash cans, barking dog, someone's boat too close to the street. Then she flips to a new page and says, Now, about the Mercer parcel. He glanced at the notice again. Her words, not mine. She calls your place an eyesore on the approach. Says it undermines the experience of Lakeside Ridge residents and devalues the community brand. He shook his head. Folks up there clap at the word brand now. That doesn't surprise me, I said quietly. The part that comes next might. He nodded. Then she says, we need to make living there so expensive for Mercer that he has no choice but to sell. Once that land changes hands, we can finally have a proper entrance and water access that matches what we're building. The room went very still. Ceiling fan ticking, swamp cooler, humming, nothing else. You sure she said it like that? I asked. As sure as I am sitting here. His jaw clenched. One of the bored fellas, you know, the silver-haired one with the golf tan. He looked a little uneasy. Asked if they'd reached out to you. She smiled that tight little smile and said, "We have. He's had ample opportunity to participate. Some people just aren't suited to this kind of community." I let that sit a moment. There it was, laid plain. This wasn't about some imaginary tall grass. It was about turning my dented gate and dusty drive into their new front porch. She talked about amended covenants, Remy went on. Said y'all's place along the road, and the water was critical to phase 2 of the vision. Then her husband stood up. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a glossy brochure, smoothing it on the table. Blue ink and smiling strangers jumped out at me. At the top, Lakeside Ridge Phase 2, the peninsula at Clearwater. The picture underneath made my stomach tighten. A finger of land stuck into a bright blue lake, dotted with white buildings and a little marina. Walking paths, umbrellas, happy people in sunglasses. "I've ridden this point since I was 10, I said. "That's my south pasture." "Not on their poster," Remy said. Graham started talking about unlocking shoreline potential and integrating legacy parcels. He had a big board with a site plan, roads running right through where your barn road is, little circles for future homes. He said they'd tried to approach you about a buyout, and you'd been unresponsive. I snorted. "First I've heard of it." "Yeah, well," he said, "that room wasn't built for hearing the other side." He looked at me for a long second. "Jake, they're planning that resort like your name on this deed is a speed bump, not a wall." Bethany straight up laid it out. "Bleed you with fines, threaten liens, make you so tired of fighting that you hand her the keys." Anger flared hot, then settled into something steadier. I'd known the fine felt wrong. Now I knew why. "Why'd you come tell me?" I asked. "You could have gone home, shut your gate, hoped they stayed pointed in my direction." He stared down at his hands, thumb worrying the edge of his cap. "My daddy and your granddad pulled a lot of stuck trucks out of a lot of washes together," he said. "When the dam went in and the county offered pennies, your folks were the only ones who told mine not to sign until they'd talked to a lawyer. We still lost some land, but not all of it." He swallowed. "Feels wrong to watch them line you up like that and say nothing. And don't kid yourself, Jake. If they get you off this road, the rest of us old places are next." I thought of Remy's low, rocky acres, of the other scattered farmhouses along this stretch, old roofs, peeling paint, fields that looked like work instead of brochures. We weren't pretty, but we were the ones who'd been here when the canyon was still just a riverbed and the ridge was scrub oak and rock. "Appreciate you coming by," I said. He nodded. His shoulders seemed to ease just a hair, like saying it out loud had eased some weight. "You going to that next meeting?" he asked. "Oh, I'll be there," I said. "But not because I think they're gonna have a change of heart." "Didn't figure," he said, a ghost of a smile on his face. We stepped back out onto the porch. The light had gone gold, painting the fence lines and the metal roofs in soft color. Out beyond the far pasture, the reservoir caught the last of the sun and turned it into a band of fire. Above it, Lakeside Ridge's neat houses were lit up like a row of lanterns. Remy paused at the steps. "They're playing a rich man's game, Jake," he said quietly. "Lawyers, councilmen, people who sign papers in buildings with marble floors. All we've got is dirt and whatever's written on those old documents." "Dirt and paper have outlasted plenty of marble," I said. "They just forget that when they're standing on tile." He huffed out a soft laugh, shook my hand, and walked back down the drive. I watched him peel off toward his own place, a small figure against the open land, kicking up little puffs of dust with every step. Back inside, I laid the glossy resort brochure next to my survey map. The shapes matched too well to be coincidence. The jut of land labeled Peninsula at Clearwater sat exactly where my south pasture narrowed between the county road and the water. Their pastel roads and walking paths sliced straight through my grazing land like it was already theirs. They'd already drawn me off the map, on paper. I pressed my palm flat over that stretch on the survey, feeling the grit of the old blueprint under my skin. Beneath that paper, under this house, under every fence post and mesquite stump out there, was the thing they really cared about. Access to water, to views, to something they could sell for a lot more than $10,000. The fine, the threats of liens, the talk about community standards, those were just tools in a longer job. They weren't coming after me because they didn't like my grass. They were coming because they wanted the ground it grew out of. I straightened, picked up the HOA notice again, reading the phrases now in that light. Leverage enforcement tools. Ensure compliance. Align with community vision. If they wanted my land so badly, if they'd already sat in air-conditioned rooms and traced roads over my pasture with silver pens, there was no telling what else they'd filed, planned, or promised. What else were they hiding? At the county office, in those amended covenants? In conversations I hadn't heard yet? The wind rattled the window over the sink. Somewhere far off, faint and tinny, I could hear music drifting down from the ridge, some HOA family celebrating a Thursday evening with wine on the patio, looking out over their lake. I folded the brochure until the picture disappeared, slid it into the lockbox with my deed, and clicked the lid shut. If they want my land so badly, what else are they hiding? I intended to find out. The days leading up to the HOA meeting passed slow, as molasses, each one hotter than the last. August had settled in with that dry, humming heat that coated everything in dust and silence. I worked my chores half on autopilot, feeding, patching wire, checking the generator, mind turning the same question over and over. What exactly had Bethany Reed filed without anybody noticing? By Thursday evening, I had the HOA letter, my deed, the survey map, and a folder of printed photos from the last month clipped neatly together. I wasn't dressing up for them, but I cleaned my boots and ran a damp cloth across my face and arms before getting in the truck. When I checked the mirror, I saw the same stubbornness I'd carried through countless field briefings, the look of a man who wasn't backing up an inch. The drive to Lakeside Ridge felt like crossing into another world. My dirt road met their paved one like a handshake nobody wanted to make. Streetlights flickered on automatically, glowing soft and warm. The speed bumps were fresh asphalt. Even the air smelled different. Irrigation water and cut grass instead of dust and cattle. The clubhouse stood just past the stone entrance pillars, a squat building of white limestone and tall windows. A few golf carts and shiny SUVs lined the curved driveway. I parked my old Ford at the far end where the dust from my tires wouldn't cling to somebody's designer paint. As I walked toward the entrance, a few residents glanced my way, quick looks, tight-lipped smiles, some turning away before I got close. I wasn't wearing a polo or loafers, just jeans, boots, and a clean work shirt. I knew what it looked like to them, the rancher who lived just outside the gates, the one their president kept mentioning in hushed tones. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a slap. The meeting room was bright, polished, and arranged with folding chairs in neat rows facing a long table. Behind it sat the board, 5 people each with a stack of papers and a bottle of water. At the center, wearing a crisp white blouse and a gold necklace that caught the overhead lights, sat Bethany Reed. She looked up when I walked in. Her smile flickered but didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Mr. Mercer, how unexpected." I gave a nod and took a seat in the front row, my folder resting across my knee. The room held maybe 30 people, couples in workout clothes, retirees in pastel shirts, a few young families. It struck me how tightly the chairs were packed, how everyone leaned toward the board table like it was a stage, Bethany cleared her throat and flicked her hands upward as if brushing dust from the air. "Let's begin," she said. "We have a full agenda tonight. First, landscaping concerns on Lake Ridge Drive." For the next 15 minutes, I listened to debates about mulch color and mailbox heights. It was surreal, grown adults passionately arguing over a neighbor's flower choices while a developer mapped roads across my pasture. But then, inevitably, the papers in front of Bethany shuffled, and her gaze sharpened. "Next," she said, tapping a page. "The matter of Parcel 14A, Mr. Mercer's property." A ripple went through the room, people sitting up straighter. She turned to me with the same tight smile she'd worn at my gate years before. "Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly, "your continued non-compliance requires board attention. Your land, what is visible from our community, has not met aesthetic standards for some time." I stood. "My land is not part of your community." A few heads turned. A man in a blue shirt frowned at me like I'd spoken out of turn at church. Bethany leaned forward, folding her hands. "According to the amended covenants, Mr. Mercer, certain parcels around the reservoir fall under shared standards to preserve collective value. Your vegetation overgrowth." I opened my folder and held up the printed photos. "Taken this morning. Grass measured at 8 inches, within Texas Ag Extension guidelines." She blinked. "That's irrelevant. Not when your violation notice says overgrown vegetation. Seems pretty relevant." Murmurs drifted through the rows. I continued, keeping my voice even. "Here's the county survey." I set the map on the table in front of her. No record of my signature on any document placing my land under HOA authority. 5 acres, maybe. The back 15, not a word. Her jaw tightened. "Mr. Mercer, we are not here to debate your personal interpretation of county filings." "No," I said quietly. "We're here because you sent me a $10,000 bill for grass you can barely see from your kitchen window." Laughter bubbled from the back before someone shushed her. Bethany's smile dropped. "You don't maintain the standards of this community," she said sharply. "Your trucks, your tools, your barn, none of it reflects the lifestyle we're creating here. This is a curated development. We are trying to elevate the region." I felt the shift then, something deep and cold settling in the room. Her words weren't accidental. They were honest. Too honest. I heard my own voice come out steady but sharper than before. "You sent me fines because you don't like the way I live? Because I'm not one of your curated people?" She exhaled through her nose. "People like you don't fit our community standards." The room went dead silent. A man in the second row coughed. Someone else whispered, "Bethany," but she didn't seem to hear them. Her gaze was fixed on me. The kind of stare that came from knowing she had the money, the board, the new houses, the momentum. The kind that said, "You're just in my way." I slid the folder back under my arm. "Good to know where we stand." "You can appeal the assessment in writing," she said curtly. "But until then, it stands. And if you continue refusing compliance, the board will vote on authorizing liens. This isn't personal, Mr. Mercer. It's order." Order. That was a word I'd heard before in rooms where maps were drawn without regard for the people living under them. I turned and walked toward the exit. The air felt heavier on the way out, like the fluorescent lights had soaked up every ounce of oxygen. Just as I reached the door, I heard Bethany call after me, quiet enough that only I caught it. "Fighting us won't end well for you." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Outside, the warm evening air hit me. The sun had dipped low, painting the reservoir gold and orange. Frogs croaked somewhere in the brush below the ridge. A boat's motor droned far out on the water. Standing there beside my dusty old truck in the shadow of their spotless clubhouse, I felt something settle inside me. Not panic, not anger, but clarity. If they wanted a legal fight, they were going to get one. The ride home was quiet, except for the rattling of old tools behind the seat and the soft hum of the tires rolling over broken asphalt. The sky had gone from orange to deep blue, streaked with thin clouds that reminded me of brushstrokes on a canvas. Out here on the open stretch between their manicured world and mine, the air felt different, lighter, honest. I rolled the window down. The night wind carried dust, the faint smell of mesquite smoke, and that low hum of crickets that never stopped this time of year. When I pulled into my drive, the yard light on the pole flickered to life, buzzing soft and warm. My house looked old, weathered, stubborn. The boards on the porch were worn smooth from decades of boots. The screen door groaned when I opened it, like it was clearing its throat to warn the house I was coming in loaded with thoughts. Inside, the kitchen was dim except for the small lamp in the corner. I set the folder down on the pine table. The HOA notice sat where I'd left it, looking even more out of place now that I'd stood in their air-conditioned courtroom of a clubhouse. My life, my land, my work, it didn't fit in the neat little boxes they'd built for themselves. I pulled out the chair and sat down, rubbing a hand over my face. The room felt too still. Outside, a gust of warm wind scraped against the window like fingers brushing old glass. I reached for the lockbox again. The metal was cool against my palms as I opened it. Inside, newspaper clippings my dad saved, old photos of my granddad standing at the fence line, the deed, the survey papers, the county map, yellowed around the edges, still smelled faintly of ink and time. I unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled, stiff at the creases. A storm was gathering somewhere out on the plains. The air had that charged heaviness, the kind that makes old maps curl at the edges. The black lines marking my boundaries were familiar as the boots on my feet. I traced them with my finger, the land etched there matching the land outside these walls. The 5 acres touching County Road 12, the barn and the house sitting on the edge of it. Then the land stretching behind, 15 acres rolling gently toward the reservoir, narrowing slightly before angling down to the water. 15 acres, the part I loved most, the part that held memories the HOA didn't know about and never would. That was where I learned to ride bareback on an old stubborn mare, where my dad taught me to track storm water and read the way the land shed rain, where my granddad walked the fence with a thermos in one hand and a pair of pliers in the other. And somehow Bethany Reed believed she had a claim to decide what that pasture should look like. I leaned back in my chair. Something wasn't adding up. If the HOA had legal jurisdiction, I would have heard about it before now. There would have been a notice. Something filed. Something signed. My thumb brushed across the survey date near the bottom of the page, June 1989. My dad's signature. The county clerk's seal, faded but clear. My gaze drifted to a newer paper tucked near the back of the box, a refinance record from a couple of years back. I pulled it out and spread it next to the survey. The coordinates matched. The acreage matched. Everything pointed to one fact. Nothing had changed on my end. So what had changed on theirs? I picked up the HOA letter again, reading the line about amended covenants filed 5 years prior. That date stuck in my mind. 5 years ago, I'd been finishing a contract job on a ranch farther west. I'd been here, coming and going, fixing things, but I hadn't been watching paperwork like a hawk. Maybe someone counted on that. I stared down at the spread of documents, then reached for my phone. My fingers hovered for a moment, before tapping a number I hadn't dialed in far too long. She picked up on the second ring. "This is Elena." "Evening," I said. "Hope I'm not calling too late." There was a small pause, then a warm shift in her voice. "Jake? Well, I'll be. Been a while." Yeah, I said. Too long. Her voice still carried that calm sharpness I remembered. Steady, tough. The kind of tone that made judges sit a little straighter. She'd left our county years ago to specialize in property law 2 towns over. Last I heard, she'd made a name for herself helping ranch families fight off predatory land grabs. I need some help, I said simply. I'm listening. I explained the fine, the meeting, the amendment I never signed, the talk about view corridors and liens. I kept it clean, factual, old habit from Army reports, but she heard the parts underneath anyway. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Jake, that doesn't sound like an HOA issue. That sounds like someone stretching jurisdiction where it doesn't belong. That's what I figured. You still have your deed? Your last county filing? Right in front of me. Good. I'm driving to the courthouse tomorrow morning. Fax, or better, text. Me clear photos of everything you've got. Deed, survey, refinance doc. That violation notice. Will do, I said. Just one question before I bury you in paperwork. Shoot. If an HOA tries to alter boundaries without a landowner's consent, I asked, how legal is that? Her answer came fast, sharp. It's not. The simplicity of it hit like a hammer. What they can do, she continued, is file amendments that apply to parcels already under HOA authority. They cannot expand their reach without unanimous agreement from every affected owner, especially not in Texas. I looked at my map again, feeling that clarity from the parking lot settle deeper in my chest. If they did, I said, then somebody filed something they weren't supposed to. Or filed something they hoped no one would check, she replied. I'll find it. And Jake? Yeah? Don't pay that fine. I smiled, leaning back in my creaking chair. Wasn't planning to. And don't get into a shouting match with Bethany. She'll twist anything you say. Keep it cold. Paper trail only. Cold was something I'd learned well. Thank you, Elena. Her voice softened. You're welcome. I always figured sooner or later, someone up at that ridge would try something like this. Didn't think it'd be this bold. Bold seems to be her specialty. Let's make it her mistake. After we hung up, I stepped outside onto the porch. The night had grown deeper, the kind of darkness you only get far from town. Stars spread thick from horizon to horizon. The reservoir shimmered faintly beyond the fields, catching the last slivers of moonlight. Lightning flickered far out on the plains, silent for now. A storm brewing. Wind moved through the grass with a dry whisper, bending the stalks just enough to remind me they were there. Steady, rooted, still growing despite everything around them. I stood there a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me. Things were moving now, faster than before. But for the first time in days, the weight sitting on my chest eased. Bethany thought she knew how this story went. Find the rancher, threaten liens, push him out. She hadn't counted on the 15 acres behind me, the ones her board couldn't touch, the ones that held the answer she didn't want to see. If they wanted to push me out, I'd give them something they couldn't push back. The next morning broke hot and windless, that kind of stillness that settles over West Texas before a change. The sky was a flat sheet of pale blue, the sun already sharp even though it wasn't much past 7. I drank my coffee standing on the porch, boots planted on the worn boards, staring out at the back acres, the land that had stayed mercifully outside the reach of Bethany Reed's paperwork. That 15-acre stretch rolled out behind the barn like a sleeping giant. Dry grass whispered, scattered mesquite cast thin shadows, and beyond it all the faint shimmer of the reservoir glinted like polished steel. I'd walked that land my whole life, but today it felt different, like it had finally spoken up and shown me what to do next. My phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. Marcus. I answered. Morning. You up? He asked, voice gravelly and too awake for the hour. I'm standing. Good, he said, because I made up my mind last night. You want that range on your back acres? I'm driving down today. Truck's already loaded. You don't waste time, I said, a ghost of a smile tugging at my mouth. I learned from you, he replied. Text me the coordinates. I'll be there before lunch. When I hung up, the wind shifted, small, but enough to carry the dusty smell of the ridge homes across the pasture. I imagined Bethany sipping her iced coffee, staring out from her glass balcony at a world she thought she controlled, a world she believed would stay quiet when she said so. She was about to learn the difference between quiet and compliant. By 10, Marcus's diesel rumbled down my drive, kicking up tan clouds that lingered behind him like smoke. He stepped out of the cab wearing a sun-bleached cap, aviators, and that lopsided grin that always made trouble feel a little less heavy. Same old place he said, scanning the land. Same old stubborn son of a gun running it. Same old idiot who answered the phone, I shot back. We shook hands hard. He glanced toward the ridge, eyes narrowing behind the sunglasses. So that's where they live, huh? The fancy crowd? Yep. And they're the ones trying to bleed you with fines? Yep. He whistled low. Well, hell, nothing wakes up the fancy crowd like a little noise. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rolled-up plans he'd sent by email. A rough layout of lanes, safety berms, and tape-measured spacing. Marcus unrolled them across the tailgate, smoothing the corners with dusty hands. Start here, he said, pointing to the map. Backstop will run along this ridge of clay. Safe direction. No houses behind it, not even close. Lane spacing here, here, and here. And if you want to host training, this spot gives you a straight 60 yards. We walked the land, dust puffing beneath our boots. Each step felt like reclaiming something that had been slipping away. Marcus planted little orange flags to mark the lines, then set thick wooden stakes where the berm would rise. By noon, sweat darkened the back of our shirts, the sun pounding down like a hammer. But the shape of the range was beginning to appear. Lines drawn, spaces carved, a purpose settling into the earth. Just before lunch, I hammered a stake beside the old fence line bordering Lakeside Ridge. On it, I hung a bright yellow sign. Caldwell Tactical Range. Private property. Authorized use only. Proceed at your own risk. Within full compliance of Texas Code. Marcus read it and grinned. That ought to get their attention. It's supposed to. We spent the afternoon leveling ground, dragging old timbers, and stacking dirt for the berm. The wind picked up again, pushing grit against our faces, carrying the smell of fresh earth and hot metal. Somewhere behind us, a hawk screeched overhead, circling wide in the white sky. At 7:42 p.m., with the sun still hanging over the ridge like a burning coin, Marcus wiped his forehead and said quietly, "Time to christen the place?" I looked at the ridge homes, white stone glowing in the orange light. Bethany's place stood tallest, her infinity pool reflecting a strip of gold. "Yeah," I said. "Time." We set a single steel target at the far lane, checked direction, tested the backstop, reviewed every safety measure twice. Marcus stood off to the side with folded arms, like a proud older brother watching someone graduate. I lifted the rifle, not a showpiece, just my old reliable .308, the one I'd hunted with for years. The metal felt warm from the sun, familiar in my hands. When I checked the scope, my reflection in the glass was calm, steady, ready. The air held still, heavy, waiting. 8:01 p.m. The first shot cracked across the valley, sharp and clean, echoing off the dry clay and bouncing toward the reservoir like a drum roll from the earth. The steel rang with a solid, satisfying ping. The sound traveled farther than I expected, across the water, up the ridge, through the manicured yards with string lights and patio waterfalls. A dog started barking. A woman shouted something faint. Then the sound of hurried footsteps on concrete patios. Marcus let out a soft laugh. Bet they heard that all the way to the HOA boardroom. A moment later, a second echo rolled down from the ridge. The sound of a door slamming, followed by a distant yell that was too faint to make out the words, but clear enough in tone. Outrage, disbelief, offended authority. We packed up for the evening, stowing tools in the bed of the truck. Marcus clapped my shoulder before leaving. Whatever comes next, Jake, you're not facing it alone. The stars were fading in as his taillights disappeared down the road. The night grew cooler, quieter. I sat on the porch steps, rifle cleaned and stored inside, and watched the distant ridge houses flicker with activity, like disturbed anthills. I'd expected anger. I'd expected calls and threats. I just hadn't expected it to start so fast. At 8:26 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. Lakeside Ridge area code. I let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. Whatever they had to say, they could say it on paper, just like they did to me. The land behind me felt alive, claimed, defended, awake. And if Bethany Reed thought that one rancher with a rifle was all she had to worry about, she hadn't been paying attention. Because the first shot was never the whole fight. It was just the start. The next morning cracked open with a hard sun and a steady wind, the kind that scraped dust across the porch and rattled loose nails in the siding. I woke to that wind and to something else, a faint buzzing on my phone that wouldn't stop. Unknown number. Then another. Then another. By the time I poured my first cup of coffee, I had 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Lakeside Ridge area codes. I didn't need to listen to know they weren't birthday wishes. I stepped outside, mug warming my palms. The morning light washed the back acres in gold. The steel targets Marcus and I set up glinted at the far end of the lane. The air still held a faint metallic scent from yesterday's shot, though that might have been wishful thinking. I didn't get long to enjoy the quiet. A white SUV, same model as before, rolled right up to my gate and stopped with a sudden jerk. Dust billowed out behind it like a warning flag. The passenger door swung open, and out stepped a man in a collared shirt, clipboard to his chest like a shield. His shoes were spotless. He froze for a second when he saw me. "Mr. Mercer?" he called out, voice tight, nasal. "That's me. I'm here on behalf of the Lakeside Ridge Property Owners Association." He ducked under the gate without waiting to be invited. "I was instructed to notify you in person that the noise disturbances reported last night violate Section 12, Subsection 5 of the revised ordinance for shared border properties." I sipped my coffee. "That so?" He held up the clipboard like it contained the 10 Commandments. "Firearm discharge within proximity of residential zones is a matter of community concern." I pointed to the sign Marcus and I hung yesterday. "This is private land, not HOA land, and everything that happened last night is fully compliant with Texas state code." His face twitched, as if he'd rehearsed a dozen arguments, but none of them applied when said out loud in front of my dusty boots and metal gate. "Well," he stammered, flipping a page, "HOA residents are deeply distressed. Mrs. Reed asked that I communicate her expectation that you cease all activities that jeopardize the serenity and market value of the Lakeside Ridge community." I smiled. "Tell Mrs. Reed she's welcome to file her concerns in writing." He swallowed hard, as if he'd hoped this conversation might go differently. Then he tucked the clipboard under his arm and scurried back to the SUV like a prairie dog who spotted a hawk. By noon, the flyers started. Bright red papers taped to mailboxes up and down the county road, mine included. Across the top, in bold letters, "Gun range threatens Community Safety Act now. Before it's too late." Underneath, a grainy, zoomed-in picture of someone who looked suspiciously like me, taken from far away, carrying a rifle across my own pasture. The caption read, "Is this what we want for our children?" I pulled the flyer off my mailbox and read it twice. The tone was dramatic enough to belong on a political ad. Phrases like reckless behavior, public menace, and high-risk environment jumped out in big block letters. Every sentence dripped fear like syrup. Then, at the bottom, paid for by the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association. I felt a slow, simmering heat rise up my neck. Not anger, not surprise, just confirmation. They were escalating. Inside the house, I laid the flyer on the table beside the HOA notice. 2 pieces of paper, different fonts, same objective. Squeeze me until I cracked. I didn't have to wonder what came next. The newspaper article dropped the following morning. A neighbor, one of the retirees who walked their tiny dog along the Lakeside Ridge sidewalks, left a copy of the local paper in my mailbox. I unfolded it on the porch. The headline stretched across the top in bold. Controversial shooting range raises safety concerns. Local residents fear for families near new gun facility. Below it, a photo of the range from halfway up the ridge, my land framed like a crime scene. The article quoted 3 concerned homeowners, all anonymous, all parroting the same lines, but one name wasn't anonymous: Bethany Reed. She was quoted twice, once expressing deep disappointment in my irresponsible and unilateral actions, and again claiming that the range was an imminent danger to the entire community. At the bottom of the article, a single boxed note read, "The Lakeside Ridge HOA board will meet next Thursday to discuss potential legal actions." I folded the paper slowly, my fingers creasing it down the center. Somewhere between the lines, my mind caught that old feeling again. The sensation I'd known overseas right before a mission shifted, when the enemy stopped hiding and started probing your defenses. I set the paper down and went inside. It was time to respond. Not with threats, not with anger, with truth, with law. I opened my laptop, an older model with keys worn shiny, and created a simple web page. Just a blank white page and a bold title. "Your HOA stories, anonymous submissions, welcome, share your experience. You are not alone." The first story came in within the hour, then another, then 5 more. By evening, the page had filled with accounts from homeowners quietly living under Lakeside Ridge's thumb. Unreasonable fines. Homes entered without permission. Threats of liens for fence color. Punitive actions for yard toys, garden boxes, even wind chimes. No names, no locations. Just stories. Real ones. And that was all it took. The next day at the feed store, 2 neighbors pulled me aside, voices low. "We saw the article," one said. "We know it's nonsense." "About time someone stood up to them," the other added. "They've been pushing folks around since those houses went up." I thanked them and headed home, dust drifting behind the truck, like smoke off a tired fire. When I reached my drive, a black SUV was idling near my fence, and Bethany Reed was standing beside it. Wind whipped her silk blouse against her sides, the bright color sharp against the pale dust. She held a folder in one hand, sunglasses in the other. Her posture was rigid, spine straight as a post. She didn't wait for me to reach her before she spoke. "Mr. Mercer," she called, voice tight, words clipped. "We need to discuss your disruptive activities." I parked, stepped out, and shut the door gently. "This conversation," I said, "needs to be in writing. You know that." Her jaw flexed. "You can't hide behind procedure. This stops now." She stepped closer to the fence, lowering her voice just enough that the wind nearly carried it away. "You don't understand who you're provoking." I held her gaze, calm, steady. "No," I said. "You don't." Her eyes flashed, not surprise but something colder. Recognition. A woman realizing the man she thought was soft clay was turning into stone. Then she stepped back, snapped her folder shut, and got into her SUV without another word. Tires spit gravel as she sped off, leaving a thin cloud drifting across the fence. When the dust settled, the land behind me looked the same, but the air felt different. The siege had begun, and Bethany had no idea how deeply I understood the rules she claimed to own. When the dust settled, the land behind me looked the same, but the air felt different. The siege had begun, and Bethany had no idea how deeply I understood the rules she claimed to own. The week leading up to the emergency HOA meeting felt like living under a slow-moving storm. Not the kind that arrives with thunder and lightning, but the kind that spreads a strange tension through the air, static in your fingertips, a heaviness in the sky, a sense that something big is rolling in whether you like it or not. For me, that feeling settled in around Wednesday morning. I was on the porch drinking coffee when a convoy of SUVs slid past the front gate. 3 shiny black ones in a row, each with tinted windows and license plate frames that read Lakeside Ridge. They didn't slow, didn't wave, just crept by as if measuring the very dust beneath their tires. I watched them disappear around the bend and set my mug down. They weren't sightseeing. They were circling. By Thursday afternoon, the flyers had escalated. New ones slapped on my gate and mailbox in bright red ink. "Stop Mercer's range, protect our children." And beneath that, a block of text claiming my reckless behavior posed a moral threat. Moral, not just physical now. They were going after character. A few yards down, Remy pulled up on his old ATV, killed the engine, and pulled the flyer off with a disgusted snort. "They're running scared," he said. "Only reason folks scream this loud is when they know they're losing ground." I didn't answer at first. My eyes drifted to a set of tire tracks leading away from my mailbox. Fresh ones, deeper than the HOA SUV tires. Someone else had driven up before Remy. Someone in a hurry. "We ready for tonight?" he asked. "Ready as we're gonna get," I said. I tapped my shirt pocket where the small recorder rested. The same one I'd set on the back pew at the last HOA meeting. I hadn't planned to record anything then, but something about Bethany's tone, smooth, polished, too rehearsed, had made me hit the button. I hadn't even listened to the file until 2 nights ago. And when I heard what she said, when I heard her whisper to another board member as the room emptied, I didn't sleep the rest of that night. So yes, I was ready. By sundown, I cleaned up, traded my dusty work shirt for a clean one, and headed up the ridge. The road wound upward through mesquite and rock until it broke into the bright, manicured world of Lakeside Ridge. The clubhouse parking lot was already full. SUVs, golf carts, a few electric cars humming quietly. Inside, the air smelled like citrus cleaner and cold AC. Rows of chairs filled the room, and every one of them was taken. Residents stood along the walls, some whispering, some fanning themselves with HOA pamphlets. The mood was tense, like a courtroom right before a verdict. Bethany sat at the center of the long table like a judge at a hearing. Graham was there too, arms crossed, face tight. 3 other board members flanked them, each with a stack of papers placed so neatly it looked choreographed. Her eyes locked onto mine the moment I stepped inside. A hint of triumph glimmered underneath her polished smile. "Mr. Mercer," she called, voice dripping with controlled civility. "Lovely of you to join us." I nodded once, took a seat front row, and waited. She banged a small wooden gavel, an unnecessary prop, but one she loved. The board has convened this emergency session, she announced, to address the disruptive, dangerous, and community-damaging activities occurring along our eastern boundary. A murmur floated through the room. She continued, flipping to a prepared speech. It is the board's unanimous recommendation that properties engaging in activities detrimental to the neighborhood be subject to an adjusted fee schedule. Specifically, she paused for dramatic effect, a 300% increase in annual assessments. Gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. An older man in the back shook his head and muttered, "This is insane." Bethany raised a hand, pretending to restore order, but soaking in the attention. "This increase is necessary," she said, "to offset the harm caused to our property values and our children's sense of safety." She cast her gaze at me like she was tossing a stone at a stray dog. "And now," she said, "we will open the floor for concerns before the board votes." I stood slowly. The room quieted. All eyes shifted my way. "Before we talk about fees," I said, voice steady, "I think it's fair the community hears how this all started." Bethany straightened. "Mr. Mercer, this is hardly—" I pressed the recorder's button. It beeped. Then the room filled with her voice, her real voice, the one she used when she thought the room was empty. "We need to push out these ranchers and veterans before they drag down property values." A collective gasp rolled through the crowd. People like Mercer don't belong in a curated community. Their lifestyles are incompatible with our vision. Someone in the second row shot to their feet. "Is that real?" Another voice. "She said that? About veterans?" A third. "Who does she think built this county?" Bethany lurched forward. "This is taken out of context. It's your voice," a woman snapped. A man near the wall pointed, visibly angry. "You want to fine this guy because you want his land." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One whispered something into Graham's ear, and his face drained of color. Across the room, tension ignited like dry brush. In the swell of noise and outrage, Bethany slammed her palm on the table. "Enough!" she yelled, losing the last of her polished veneer. "You don't understand what's required to maintain a luxury community." Her words hung in the air like dust in a sunbeam. Then, someone laughed. Not a happy laugh, a disbelieving one. And just like that, the room turned. Voices rose. Questions, accusations, demands. People who'd been quietly unhappy for months now erupted. A woman described being fined for having a wind chime too reflective. A man said Bethany threatened liens when his wife planted tomatoes in a raised bed, visible from the street. Others confirmed stories just like the ones posted on my anonymous site. Graham tried to lean in and calm her, but she jerked her arm away like his touch burned. Her confidence cracked. Not shattered. Not yet. But cracked deep. I turned the recorder off and slipped it back into my pocket. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had done the heavy lifting. Bethany's eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who still looked at her like she was in charge. But the board members avoided her gaze. The residents glared. The room had shifted, its weight no longer in her favor. Still, there was something in her expression that didn't match the panic around her. It was too cold, too certain, like she held on to some last card no one else could see. She smoothed her blouse, forced her breathing down, and fixed her eyes back on me. "This isn't over," she said quietly. Not by a long shot. And the strange part? She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a promise. When I walked out of the clubhouse that night, the air outside felt sticky with heat, thick with the smell of lake water and asphalt still cooling from the day. Voices from inside spilled through the doors behind me. Angry, confused, hurt. The spell of Bethany Reed's authority had cracked, but it hadn't shattered. Not yet. Not completely. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and bumped down the ridge road. Halfway home, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. A vehicle followed me for a mile before turning off abruptly into one of the fancy cul-de-sacs. I let the thought sit in my mind like a pebble in my boot. Small, irritating, not dangerous on its own, but bothersome enough to pay attention to. By the time I pulled into my yard, the sky had turned a deep velvet blue. The porch light flickered, then steadied. I shut off the engine. The night wrapped itself around me. Crickets, distant frogs along the reservoir, the soft creak of the windmill turning slow in the breeze. I was halfway to the porch when I noticed a silhouette standing near my fence line. Broad shoulders, hands in pockets, posture stiff. For a split second, instinct kicked in, heart tightening, body alert. Then he stepped into the glow of the pole light. Graham Reed, Bethany's husband, developer. The man whose resort brochures stole my pasture without asking. He didn't belong out here. He looked like he'd melt if dust touched his loafers. But there he was, staring at me like a man who'd lost a night's sleep. I walked toward him slowly. "Evening," I said. He swallowed. "Mercer. What brings you onto my fence line at this hour?" He shifted his weight. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled to the elbows. This wasn't the same polished man who sat beside Bethany during those HOA meetings, nodding dutifully while she played queen. This was someone beaten down by something heavier. "I didn't want to be seen coming here," he said quietly. "Can we talk? Not inside. Out here is fine." I leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "Start talking." He rubbed the bridge of his nose like it hurt. "What my wife did tonight. That recording. It blindsided me." "Strange," I said. "Sounded rehearsed." "It wasn't. At least not to me." He exhaled sharply. "You need to understand something. Bethany's been under pressure. Investors, deadlines, public perception. These HOA folks, she believes she's holding together an empire. By pushing out the people who were here first?" He winced. "Look, that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" He hesitated. Then he said the words that changed everything. "There's an aquifer under your land." The breeze stilled. Even the insects seemed to quiet. I stared at him. "Say that again." He ran a hand through his hair. "A pristine, high-yield aquifer, the cleanest source in the region. My engineers discovered it during preliminary studies for the resort. We thought it extended under public land, but the strongest part sits directly beneath your pasture." I felt the words sink like stones into water, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. "You're telling me," I said, "that this land," I tapped the fence post with my knuckles, "has a water source underneath it worth how much?" His eyes flickered. "Millions. Tens of millions in the long term. Water rights aren't just valuable, they're power." And there it was. The piece of the puzzle that explained every fine, every threat, every change in tone. This wasn't about views, or grass, or community aesthetics. It was about water. Graham's voice dropped. "Bethany wants control of that aquifer. She believes the HOA can take it, piece by piece, by building a case that you're neglecting the land, that you're hurting community value, that your property is a liability." "That why she forged boundaries?" I asked softly. His head jerked up. "You know." "I do now." Graham cursed under his breath. "She expanded the HOA map without telling me. Filed it with a county clerk who owes us favors. She said you'd never notice. Said ranchers don't keep up with paperwork." I kept my voice even. "What do you want, Graham?" "To distance myself," he said quickly. "From her, from this mess, Investors are pulling back, journalists are calling, and you're recording her meltdown. It's going to tear the HOA apart. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can get you everything. Signed drafts, internal memos, boundary documents, environmental impact studies. I'll testify if I have to. And what do you want in return? His eyes were tired, too tired for a man his age. Immunity, from whatever comes next. I can't go down with her. She crossed a line, and she's not coming back from it. I watched him, really watched him. A man trapped in a house he no longer controlled. A man trying to outrun a storm he helped build. But I wasn't letting sympathy cloud things. You're telling me, I said, that your wife weaponized the HOA to seize my land because she wants to control an aquifer. Yes. You're telling me she forged signatures. Yes. And now you want to hand me the ammunition and walk away clean. He swallowed. Yes. I looked out over my land, the pasture rolling gently toward the reservoir, the faint shimmer of moonlight on the water. My granddad had walked this dirt with a quiet reverence. My dad taught me how to read the land like a book, how water traveled beneath it, how soil held secrets. And now I knew this ranch held more than memories. It held a resource Bethany would ruin her life to control. I turned back to Graham. Bring me everything, I said. Every document, every file, every report. He nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. I will, tomorrow morning. And Graham? He stopped mid-turn. You better hope you're telling me the truth. Because if you're not, what happens next won't be something you can bargain your way out of. He swallowed hard. It's the truth, he said. Bethany's not finished, and she's desperate now. Desperate people. His voice trailed off. Do reckless things, I finished. He gave a hollow nod, climbed into his SUV and rolled slowly down the drive. No dust cloud this time. I stood there long after his taillights faded. The wind picked up again, rustling the dry grass at my boots and sending ripples across the dark surface of the reservoir. For the first time since this whole fight began, I felt something sharp settle into my chest. Not suspicion, not anger. Purpose. I finally knew what this was really about. Not grass, not fines, not even the resort. It was about water. And water, out here, is life. The day after Graham's confession crawled by with a strange, humming tension, like the land itself was waiting for something to break. I kept myself busy, patching fence, hauling feed, checking the generator, but every few minutes my mind drifted back to that aquifer, to underground rivers flowing beneath my boots, to the way Bethany's eyes had gone cold when the recording played at the meeting. People will fight for a view. They'll lie for property value, but they will burn the world down for water. By sundown, a sickly orange haze drifted across the sky. Maybe wildfire smoke blowing in from the next county. Maybe a dust front. Maybe nothing. But the air felt wrong, tight around the edges. My gut had that quiet twist I'd learned not to ignore. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and settled in. Around midnight, the dogs started acting strange, pacing, whining low in their throats. Then, at 12:51 a.m., the motion light behind the barn flicked on. Probably a deer, I told myself. But the feeling in my chest said otherwise. I grabbed my old field flashlight, stepped out onto the porch, and listened. The wind had died completely. The night lay dark and heavy, broken only by the soft mechanical click of my security cameras shifting positions. At 1:03 a.m., the southwest camera pinged my phone. Movement detected. Back acre number 3. I pulled up the feed. 3 figures moved along the fence line. Dark clothing. Slow, deliberate steps. One carried a long object that looked exactly like a gas can. Another held something smaller. Maybe a tool, maybe a lighter, maybe both. And behind them, her posture unmistakable even in grainy black and white. Bethany Reed. A cold calm washed over me. The same calm I'd felt years ago before walking into situations where panic had no place. No anger, no adrenaline, just focus. I hit record. Then I texted Sheriff Cole Jackson a single message. Uninvited guests, back acres, looks like arson setup, footage rolling. He replied immediately. On the way. Stay out of sight. I slipped out the side door, keeping to the shadows. The night smelled like dust and a hint of mesquite. My boots made almost no sound on the dry ground. Years of moving quietly, tracking cattle in the dark, walking perimeters in places far from home, came back like breathing. I crouched behind an old hay trailer and switched off my flashlight. The voices carried first. You sure the cameras are blind here? One of the men whispered. Bethany hissed back. Yes. This angle points toward the ridgeline. Just pour it. Make it look like faulty wiring from his barn. Insurance will blame him. The HOA will force a safety review, and once he's financially crippled. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The other man shook the gas can. Should we hit the targets too? No, she snapped. Just the building. We need the narrative of negligence. I felt the anger then, not wild, not blinding, but steady, controlled, like a fire that knew exactly where to burn. I zoomed the camera in with my phone. Clear faces now, clear voices, clear intent. They moved around the back of my equipment shed, splashing liquid along the baseboards. The smell of fuel reached me, faint but distinct, carried by a barely there breeze. At 1:17 a.m., distant engines broke the silence. 3 vehicles moving fast but quietly. No sirens. Sheriff Jackson knew how to approach a situation like this. I stayed low, phone recording, as the distant headlights killed and the sheriff's units glided toward my property like shadows. Then, all at once, floodlights snapped on, bright white beams slicing across the back acres. Sheriff's office! Drop everything! The 2 men froze, gas cans dangling from their hands. One bolted but didn't make it 2 steps before a deputy caught his arm and twisted him around. Bethany, however, ran. Her heels sank into the soft dirt, slipping as she tried to sprint for the black SUV parked 100 yards up the fence. She made it halfway before Sheriff Jackson intercepted her himself, stepping into her path with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who'd seen all kinds of people run from all kinds of crimes. She tripped on her own shoe, fell forward, and the sheriff caught her by the arm. Bethany Reed, he said, voice firm but calm. You are under investigation for attempted arson, criminal trespass, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. You have the right to remain silent. She jerked her arm, eyes wild. Do you know who I am? My husband? My board? My community will not stand for... They already know, the sheriff cut in. And judging by the calls we've gotten tonight, they're not standing with you. The deputies collected the gas cans, took photographs, and confirmed everything on my security footage. I stepped forward, staying behind the sheriff until he motioned me closer. You all right, Jake? He asked. I'm fine. Got everything on camera? Every second. He nodded. This'll hold. Solid case. Bethany twisted toward me, hair falling from its pinned style, face streaked with sweat and dust. The controlled, polished HOA president was gone. What stared at me now was a person who'd been cornered by her own choices. This is your fault, she spat. All of it. You should have sold when we gave you the chance. You don't belong here. You never did. You and your dusty land and your guns. Ma'am, a deputy warned, but she kept going. You think a recording and a website and some old piece of land make you powerful? You're nothing. My family built that ridge, built this county. Sheriff Jackson raised a hand. That's enough, he said sharply. Save it for your attorney. She kept staring at me, breathing hard, as deputies guided her toward the cruiser. The two accomplices, one a contractor I vaguely recognized, the other a maintenance worker from the ridge, were handcuffed and loaded into a separate vehicle. The sheriff stayed behind, his boots planted in the dirt beside me as the other units pulled away. The night grew still again, just crickets, wind, the faint hum of the reservoir. Jake, he said, voice low, you handled this exactly right. I just documented what they gave me. He exhaled, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see a night like this out here. I looked out over the land, the shed, the targets, the fence line where their figures had moved like ghosts minutes earlier. Desperation makes people stupid, I said. And desperate, he added. This won't stop tonight, but you've got enough evidence now to bury any claim they had. I nodded once. The weight in my chest eased, not gone, but lighter, the kind of lightness that comes from truth finally stepping into the open. When the last cruiser rolled away, I stood alone under the wide Texas sky, my land quiet once more. The shed stood unharmed. The targets gleamed faintly. The reservoir shimmered in the moonlight. For a long moment I listened to the wind brushing through the grass. Tonight could have gone another way, a worse way, a way that would have taken more from me than land or money. But it didn't. Because I was ready. Because Bethany underestimated the man she tried to starve out. Because truth, when recorded, is louder than fire. Morning came slow the next day. Soft, washed-out light creeping over the ridge like it was afraid to disturb what happened in the dark. I hadn't slept. Not really. I dozed in my porch chair with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, boots still on, watching the horizon grow pale while the night replayed itself in my head. By sunrise, word had already spread. The sheriff's office posted its public incident report. Deputies confirmed the arrests. Neighbors started texting me screenshots. Even people from town, folks I barely knew, sent messages of support or disbelief. But the real storm hit around noon. Elena called. Jake, she said without preamble, I just got off the phone with the county prosecutor. They're filing charges in full. All three. Attempted arson, criminal trespass, conspiracy. And because the HOA had record of internal conflicts with you, it establishes motive. I rubbed my eyes, letting her words settle like dust. Good. There's more, she added. Your footage is airtight. The sheriff's report matches your timestamps to the second. And Graham submitted everything he promised. Everything. Her voice sharpened. Jake. She forged documents, amended boundaries, filed false bylaws. The aquifer reports alone could sink half her development plans. I leaned back in my chair, looking out across my land, soft morning wind rustling the grass, dust rising in faint swirls, a meadowlark perched on the fence like it came to listen. Then we're finally getting somewhere, I said. Oh, we're not just getting somewhere, Elena replied. We've arrived. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a week later. The county courthouse sat squat and old under a Colorado blue sky, its limestone walls chipped, its flag snapping in the breeze. I stood outside in my best shirt, boots polished, hair combed back the way my dad used to before Sunday service. Elena walked beside me, sharp and composed, a stack of organized folders under her arm. Ready? She asked. Been ready, I said. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than the AC should have made it. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, a judge who looked old enough to remember when the county only had one paved road. Bethany sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her perfect hair was pulled back more severely than usual, And for the first time since this began, she seemed small. Not physically, just deflated. Like someone who'd spent years building a tower and realized it stood on sand. Graham sat behind her, not next to her, eyes forward, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her, not once. When the proceedings began, the prosecutor laid everything bare. Security footage, gas cans, audio recordings, false filings, boundary manipulation, the forged bylaw amendments. Elena presented our evidence in quiet, devastating order. Deed maps, survey records, Graham's documents, emails showing HOA pressure on HOA residents, statements from neighbors intimidated into silence. The judge listened, expression unreadable. Then they played the recording, Bethany's voice echoing across the courtroom speakers. We need to push out these ranchers and veterans before they drag down property values. Several people in the benches behind me gasped. Even the bailiff shook his head. Bethany didn't look up. Her hands trembled slightly. When everything finished, the judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Reed, he said slowly, your actions displayed profound disregard for the law, for your community, and for basic decency. He outlined her sentence carefully, measured and lawful. Suspended jail time, probation under supervision, mandatory community service, and restitution. A great deal of restitution. Not just to me, but to every resident wronged by her actions. Every fine issued illegally. Every homeowner pressured into silence. Every boundary line she bent. When it came to my portion, he looked directly at me. Mr. Mercer, he said, you are owed damages. Do you wish to pursue further compensation? I stood. My boots echoed softly on the courthouse floor. Elena looked at me, prepared for the battle she expected I might choose. But I shook my head slightly. No, Your Honor, I said. I'm not looking to take anything from anyone, only to make sure justice is done. I let him and her sit with that for a breath. But, I continued, I ask that Mrs. Reed's restitution to me be directed to a nonprofit supporting local veterans housing. Even the prosecutor blinked. The judge nodded slowly, something like respect passing through his expression. So ordered. Bethany looked up then, eyes red, lips parted, not in gratitude, not in remorse, but in bewilderment. She didn't understand that mercy wasn't weakness. Out here, mercy was choice. After the hearing, I stepped outside. The sun hit me like an old friend, warm and steady. Elena joined me. That was gracious, she said. Wasn't for her, Sushum, I replied. It was for me. She smiled softly. Your granddad would be proud. We walked down the courthouse steps together, and for the first time since this nightmare started, the weight on my chest was completely gone. 2 weeks later, the reformed HOA board, now led by Michael Chen, passed new bylaws, transparent and fair. They dissolved the illegal amendments Bethany had filed. Old fines were erased. Residents cheered. Graham's development, scaled down, redesigned, and permanently stripped of access to the aquifer. Turns out, when you build on lies, the foundation never holds. On Sunday morning, just after sunrise, I stood at the firing line of Caldwell Tactical Range. Dew clung to the grass, shimmering like tiny mirrors. The reservoir glowed silver under the early light. A gentle wind brushed across the valley. I lifted my rifle, settled into position, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the land. Clean, controlled, safe. Not to intimidate, not to antagonize, but to remind myself of something simple and true. Freedom has an echo. Sometimes you hear it in a courtroom, sometimes in a neighbor standing up beside you, and sometimes in the sharp, honest sound rolling across a Texas pasture at daybreak. I lowered the rifle, breathed in the morning air, and felt the land settle under my boots. Steady, mine, whole. They tried to starve me out of my own land. But this ranch had fed my family for generations. And now it fed justice, too. If you've ever had to stand your ground against an HOA or anyone who forgot what fairness means, drop a justice in the comments so we know we're not alone out here. And if this story hit a little close to home, or reminded you that land and dignity are worth protecting, stick around with us. Hit subscribe to join me for the next ranch-side tale of grit, courage, and good old-fashioned common sense.